My name is Firdausi, and I need to tell you about the question that destroyed my life and saved my soul. I was 23 years old, working as a nurse in a small clinic in Casablanca, Morocco, when everything fell apart. But let me start with something strange. 3 weeks before my arrest, I kept having the same dream every night. In the dream, I was drowning in dark water, sinking deeper and deeper, when suddenly a hand reached down and pulled me up into brilliant light. I would wake up confused and scared, not understanding what it meant. Looking back now, I realize God was preparing me for what was coming, showing me that even in the darkest waters, He would not let me drown. The question came during a staff meeting at the clinic where I worked. Our supervisor was discussing a new policy about treating Christian patients, making jokes about how they were misguided people who had corrupted the true message of Prophet Isa. Everyone laughed except me. Something inside me felt uncomfortable with the way she spoke about Christians with such contempt. Without thinking, I raised my hand and asked a simple question. What if the Christians are right about Jesus being more than just a prophet? What if He really is the Son of God like they believe? The room went completely silent. My supervisor stared at me like I had just slapped her across the face. My co-workers shifted in their seats, suddenly finding the floor very interesting to look at. That single question marked me as dangerous. Within 2 days, I was called to a meeting with the clinic director and 2 men I had never seen before. They asked me to explain what I meant by my question, whether I had been reading Christian materials, and if I had any Christian friends influencing my thinking. I tried to explain that I was just curious, just asking a philosophical question, but they did not believe me. They told me I was being placed on temporary leave while they investigated whether I was suitable to continue working in a medical facility. I walked out of that meeting knowing my life had just taken a turn into territory I did not understand. That night, I went home and did something I had never done before. I got on my knees and prayed. Not the memorized prayers I had recited 5 times daily since childhood, but a desperate conversation with God. I asked Him to show me the truth about Jesus, whoever He really was. I had no idea that prayer was about to be answered in ways that would cost me everything. The investigation at the clinic ended with my dismissal 3 weeks later. They claimed it was due to budget cuts, but everyone knew the real reason. My question about Jesus had marked me as someone with dangerous thoughts, someone who could not be trusted in a position of influence. I felt angry and confused as I packed my few belongings from my locker. I had worked so hard to become a nurse, studying late into the night, sacrificing time with friends and family, and now it was all gone because of one question. But something strange was happening inside me. Instead of feeling crushed by the loss of my job, I felt an unexpected sense of freedom, as if invisible chains I had worn my whole life were beginning to loosen. I want to invite you to share your prayer requests in the comments below. Whatever you're facing today, whether it's a personal challenge, a family situation, a health concern, or simply a desire for spiritual growth, our intercessory team is here to stand with you in prayer. We believe in the power of collective prayer, and we don't want you to carry your burdens alone. Take a moment to write out your request, and know that it will be lifted up with faith and compassion by our prayer warriors who are committed to interceding on your behalf. If you haven't already subscribed to this channel, I encourage you to hit that subscribe button and become part of this incredible faith-building community. This is more than just a platform. It's a family of believers who share their testimonies, support one another through trials, and celebrate victories together. When you subscribe, you're joining a space where faith is strengthened, hope is renewed, and prayers are answered. Let's continue to build each other up and witness God's faithfulness together in this journey of faith. Without a job, I had time to search for answers to the question that had cost me so much. I began visiting the old bookshops in the Medina, the ancient market area of Casablanca, looking for any books about different religions. Most shops only carried Islamic texts, but one elderly shopkeeper noticed my searching eyes and pulled me aside. He told me in a whisper that he had books about Christianity hidden in a back room, books that he kept for the few brave souls who wanted to learn about other faiths. My heart pounded as I followed him through a narrow doorway into a dusty storage room. He handed me a book with a plain brown cover and told me to hide it well. When I got home and opened it, I discovered it was a Bible in Arabic, the first one I had ever held in my hands. Reading that Bible felt like drinking water after years of thirst. I would wait until my family was asleep, then read by the light of my phone under my blanket like a child hiding a forbidden treasure. The words of Jesus in the Gospels were completely different from anything I had learned about him growing up. He spoke with such authority and love, healing the sick, welcoming outcasts, and claiming to be the way to God himself. I discovered verses that made my heart race with excitement and fear. Jesus said he came to give life abundantly, to seek and save the lost, to be the light of the world. I found myself crying as I read his words, feeling like he was speaking directly to me across 2,000 years. After 2 months of secret reading and praying, I knew I could not keep this discovery to myself. Through careful questions and conversations, I found 3 other young women in my neighborhood who were also secretly reading about Jesus. We began meeting in different locations, never the same place twice, discussing what we were learning and praying together. We called ourselves seekers, too afraid yet to call ourselves Christians, but desperately hungry to know more about this Jesus who was transforming our understanding of God, ourselves, and everything we thought we knew about faith and truth. Our secret meetings continued for 4 months before someone betrayed us. We never discovered who reported us to the authorities, though I have my suspicions. It might have been a neighbor who noticed our unusual comings and goings, or perhaps one of our family members who overheard a conversation we thought was private. In Morocco, apostasy is not officially punishable by death like in some countries, but converting from Islam to Christianity brings severe social consequences, family rejection, and often imprisonment on various charges that authorities can manufacture. We knew the risks, but we believed we were being careful enough. We were wrong. The arrest happened on a cold January night in 2020. I was 24 years old by then, and our group had grown to 14 women, all of us meeting in the basement of an abandoned building on the outskirts of the city. We were praying together when we heard heavy footsteps on the stairs above us. Before any of us could move, the door burst open and religious police flooded into the room with flashlights and cameras. They photographed everything, including the Bibles we had been reading, the notebooks where we had written prayers, and our faces frozen in shock and terror. They lined us up against the wall and demanded to know who the leader was, who had corrupted us with Christian lies, and how long we had been meeting. When none of us answered, they began shouting that we were traitors to our families, our country, and our faith. We were taken to separate police stations for questioning. I spent that entire night in a cold interrogation room answering the same questions over and over. They wanted names of other Christians, locations of churches, sources of our Bibles, and detailed confessions of our apostasy. I tried to protect the others by claiming I had been the one who started everything, that I had influenced the other women and led them astray. This was not true, but I hoped it might reduce their punishment. Instead, my confession only made my own situation worse. By morning, I was transferred to a women's detention center where I learned that all 14 of us had been arrested and charged with crimes against public morals, spreading false religion, and undermining state security. The prosecutor told me with satisfaction that we would be held for trial, and that the evidence against us was overwhelming. As I sat in that cell watching the sunrise through barred windows, I remembered the dream I had months earlier about drowning in dark water. Now I understood what it meant, and I desperately needed that hand to reach down and pull me up because I was sinking fast into waters darker than I ever imagined. The trial was quick and brutal. All 14 of us were sentenced to 5 years in prison while authorities decided our final punishment. This waiting period was designed to break us, to give us time to renounce our faith and return to Islam. The women's prison where we were held was a concrete building with tiny cells, poor ventilation, and guards who treated us with special cruelty because of our crime. We were kept separate from the general prison population, and allowed only brief moments together during mealtimes. Most days I spent alone in my cell, a space barely large enough to lie down, with a small window too high to see through and a metal door that trapped the heat in summer and let the cold seep in during winter. The hardest part was not the physical conditions but the psychological torture of uncertainty. We did not know what our final punishment would be or when the authorities would make their decision. Some days guards would tell us we would be released if we just signed papers renouncing Christianity. Other days they would threaten us with longer sentences or transfer to worse facilities. My family disowned me completely after the trial. My mother sent one letter saying I had brought shame upon them and that she considered me dead. My younger sisters were forbidden from mentioning my name. I learned that my father had held a funeral prayer for me at the mosque as if I had actually died. This grief was worse than any physical pain because I loved my family deeply and never wanted to hurt them. But I could not deny what I had discovered about Jesus, even to ease their suffering or my own. During those 5 years, the only thing that kept me from complete despair was prayer and the verses I had memorized from the Bible before my arrest. I would recite them silently in my cell, clinging to promises that God had not forgotten me and that His plans for me were good even when everything looked terrible. The other 13 women became like sisters to me. When we had brief moments together, we would encourage each other and share what God was teaching us through our suffering. 3 of the women eventually gave in to the pressure and signed papers renouncing Christianity. They were released, but we never heard from them again. The remaining 11 of us made a pact to stand firm no matter what happened. We believed that God had allowed our imprisonment for a purpose we could not yet see, and we trusted that He would be faithful to complete whatever work He had started in us when we first opened those hidden Bibles and discovered the love of Jesus Christ for ourselves. In the 4th year of my imprisonment, my body began to fail in ways that terrified me. I started experiencing severe pain in my abdomen that would come in waves, leaving me doubled over on my cell floor, unable to move or breathe properly. At first the prison guards ignored my complaints, assuming I was faking illness to get special treatment or early release. But when I began vomiting blood and losing consciousness, they had no choice but to take me to the prison medical facility. The doctor there was a middle-aged man named Dr. Hamid, a practicing Muslim who took his medical duties seriously. He examined me carefully, and his face grew concerned as he reviewed the results of basic tests. Dr. Hamid told the prison authorities that my condition was serious and potentially life-threatening. He suspected I had developed severe complications that the prison clinic could not properly diagnose or treat. He insisted that I needed to be referred to a larger hospital in the city for advanced testing and specialist care. The authorities resisted at first because allowing a prisoner accused of apostasy to leave the facility created security complications and paperwork they wanted to avoid. But Dr. Hamid was persistent, warning them that if I died in custody without proper medical care, it would create problems for everyone involved. Finally, they agreed to transfer me under guard to Mohammed V Hospital in Casablanca for evaluation and treatment. The hospital became my temporary home for 3 weeks as doctors ran test after test trying to understand what was wrong with my body. I was kept in a secure room with guards posted outside, but the environment was so different from prison that I felt like I could breathe again. The nurses were kind, the food was decent, and I had windows that showed me the sky and trees I had not seen properly in 4 years. Dr. Hamid visited me several times during those weeks, checking on my progress and making sure I was receiving proper care. During one of his visits, he did something completely unexpected. He sat beside my bed and told me quietly that he had been reading my medical file and prisoner records. He knew I was imprisoned for converting to Christianity, and while he did not share my faith, he respected that I had held firm to my beliefs despite years of imprisonment. He said something in my eyes reminded him of his own daughter who had died young, and he could not stand the thought of me wasting away in that prison when I clearly needed long-term medical care and a chance at life. Dr. Hamid visited me one evening when the regular guards had been replaced by new ones who did not know the routines as well. He checked my vital signs like he always did, but then he did something that changed everything. He slipped an envelope under my pillow and told me not to open it until he left the room. His eyes held a message I could not quite read, something between compassion and urgency. After he walked out, I waited a few minutes before carefully opening the envelope. Inside was cash, more money than I had seen in years, and a small piece of paper with an address written on it and 3 words that made my heart stop. Go tonight. Trust God. I lay there trembling, trying to understand what Dr. Hamid was offering me. He was giving me a chance to escape, to run away from the prison sentence that still had 1 more year remaining, from the final judgment that might still come, from the life of captivity that had consumed 4 years already. But escape meant becoming a fugitive, meant never being able to return to my family or my old life, meant living in hiding and constant fear of being caught. I prayed desperately for wisdom, asking God if this was really His way of delivering me, or if it was a temptation that would only make things worse. As I prayed, I felt a deep peace settle over me and a clear sense that God was opening a door I needed to walk through even though I could not see what was on the other side. That same evening, I told the guards I needed to walk in the hallway to stretch my legs because I had been lying down all day and felt stiff. This was not unusual, as the doctors had encouraged light movement as part of my recovery. The new guards were less strict than the regular ones, and they agreed as long as I stayed on the same floor. I walked slowly down the corridor, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. When I reached the stairwell at the far end, I glanced back and saw the guards were distracted talking to each other. I slipped through the door and began descending the stairs as quickly as my weak body would allow. Every floor I passed, I expected to hear alarms or shouting behind me, but somehow I made it to the ground level and out a side exit that hospital staff used. The cool night air hit my face and I realized I was outside prison walls for the first time in 4 years. I pulled my hospital head covering low over my face and walked into the darkness toward a new life I could not yet imagine, trusting that the God who had sustained me through imprisonment would guide me through whatever came next in this unexpected journey of faith and survival. I used some of the money Dr. Hamid gave me to take a late-night bus to Marrakesh, a city several hours away where I hoped to disappear among the crowds of tourists and locals. The bus ride was terrifying because I kept imagining police checkpoints where they would discover I was an escaped prisoner. Every time the bus slowed down, my stomach clenched with fear. But God protected me and we arrived in Marrakesh without incident just as the sun was rising over the city. I had never been to Marrakesh before and everything felt foreign and overwhelming. The address Dr. Hamid had given me turned out to be a small guest house run by an elderly woman who asked no questions when I showed up at her door. I think Dr. Hamid had contacted her somehow, preparing the way for me, though I never knew the details of their arrangement. I stayed hidden in that guest house for 2 weeks, recovering my strength and trying to figure out what to do next. I could not contact my family or any of my old friends because that would endanger both them and me. I had no identification papers since those had been confiscated when I was arrested. I was essentially invisible, a person who officially did not exist in any legal sense. The weight of this isolation pressed down on me heavily. I would lie awake at night wondering if my escape had been a mistake, if I should have just stayed in prison and faced whatever judgment was coming. But then I would remember the words Jesus spoke in the Bible about how even the sparrows are cared for by God and how much more valuable human beings are to Him. If God noticed when a small bird fell, surely He knew where I was and had a plan for my survival. Finding a church felt impossible and dangerous at first. I was afraid that if I asked anyone about Christian gatherings, they might report me to authorities. But I was spiritually starving after years of being cut off from fellowship and teaching. One morning I was walking through a quiet residential area when I noticed a building with a small cross barely visible above the door, so faded and weathered that most people would not notice it. My heart began racing as I approached. I knocked quietly and an older man opened the door with a cautious expression. I told him simply that I was looking for people who follow Jesus and that I desperately needed help. He studied my face for a long moment, then opened the door wider and welcomed me inside. That moment of entering that church felt like coming home after years of being lost. I broke down crying right there in the entrance, and the man gently led me to a chair and brought me water. He introduced himself as Pastor Youssef and told me that I was safe here, that many people in this fellowship had similar stories of persecution and escape. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe freely and be myself without hiding or pretending or fearing. Pastor Youssef and his small congregation became my new family during those difficult months in Marrakesh. The church consisted of about 30 people, all Moroccan believers who had converted from Islam and faced various levels of persecution. Some had lost jobs like me, others had been disowned by families, and a few had even survived physical attacks from angry relatives. We met in different homes each week, never establishing a pattern that could be easily tracked by authorities. The services were simple but deeply meaningful, with worship songs sung quietly so neighbors would not hear, Bible teaching that felt like fresh water to my thirsty soul, and prayers that were filled with both desperation and hope. These believers taught me that following Jesus in Morocco meant living in constant tension between faithfulness and wisdom, between boldly proclaiming truth and carefully protecting yourself and others. Pastor Youssef helped me find work cleaning houses for wealthy families in Marrakesh. It was humble work that paid very little, but it kept me occupied and provided enough money for food and rent in a tiny room I shared with 2 other women from the church. The families I worked for never asked questions about my background, and I never volunteered information. I became skilled at being forgettable, at blending into the background of other people's lives. Sometimes while cleaning their beautiful homes filled with expensive furniture and decorations, I would think about my own family and wonder what had become of them. Did my sisters ever think of me? Did my mother still consider me dead? Or had time softened her heart even slightly? These questions haunted me during long workdays, but I had learned to take those painful thoughts to Jesus in prayer, trusting that even the broken pieces of my family relationships were not beyond his ability to heal someday. The hardest part of my new life was living with constant low-level fear that never completely went away. Every time I saw police officers on the street, my heart would race. Every time someone looked at me too closely or asked too many questions, I worried my secret would be discovered. I knew that escaped prisoners who were recaptured often faced harsher sentences, and I had no idea if authorities were actively searching for me or if I had simply been forgotten in the system. Pastor Youssef counseled me to trust God's protection day by day rather than worrying about future possibilities I could not control. He reminded me of how God had sustained the Israelites in the wilderness with manna each morning, providing exactly what they needed for that day without promising the next day's provision in advance. This became my spiritual discipline during that season, learning to receive each day as a gift from God, and to trust that He who had brought me safely this far would continue to guide my steps even through the uncertainty and shadows that defined my fugitive existence. After 8 months of living quietly in Marrakesh, Pastor Youssef approached me with an unexpected proposal that would change the direction of my life once again. He told me that the underground church network across Morocco was in desperate need of people who could travel between cities carrying messages, Bibles, and supplies to isolated believers. Because I had no official identification and had already learned to live invisibly, I was in a strange way perfectly suited for this dangerous work. The authorities were not actively searching for me as far as we knew, and my nursing background meant I could also provide basic medical care to believers in remote areas who had no access to healthcare. Pastor Youssef did not pressure me to accept this role, but he explained that God often prepares people through suffering to serve others who are suffering in similar ways. I spent 3 days praying about this decision, wrestling with fear and doubt. Part of me wanted to stay hidden in my small safe corner of Marrakesh, cleaning houses and attending secret church meetings without drawing any attention. But another part of me, the part that had grown stronger through 4 years of prison, knew that I had not survived everything just to live in permanent hiding. I thought about the other 10 women from my original group who were still imprisoned, still waiting for their final sentences, still holding on to faith despite the crushing weight of their circumstances. I thought about the question that had started my entire journey, the simple wondering about whether Jesus was who Christians said he was. That question had cost me everything, but it had also given me everything that truly mattered. How could I keep that discovery to myself when so many others across Morocco were hungry for the same truth? I told Pastor Youssef I would do it, that I would become a courier for the underground church network. He embraced me like a father and told me he was proud of my courage but also wanted me to understand the risks clearly. Many couriers had been caught over the years, and their punishments were severe because authorities considered them more dangerous than ordinary converts. They were seen as people who were actively spreading Christianity rather than simply practicing it privately. But Pastor Youssef also told me stories of how God had protected couriers in miraculous ways, how Bibles had made it through checkpoints hidden in plain sight, how believers in isolated mountain villages had received exactly the encouragement they needed at exactly the right moment through a visiting courier. As I listened to these stories, I felt the same peace I had experienced in the hospital when Dr. Hamid slipped that envelope under my pillow. This was not a safe path, but it was the path God was calling me to walk, and I knew from experience that His presence in dangerous places was better than safety without Him. My first assignment as a leader came 2 weeks later when Pastor Youssef asked me to travel to Fez, a city in northern Morocco, to deliver Bibles and medicines to a small group of believers there. He gave me a worn backpack containing 10 Arabic Bibles wrapped in plain cloth, basic medical supplies, and letters from other churches offering encouragement. He also gave me detailed instructions about how to travel safely, which bus routes to take, where to sit to avoid suspicion, and what to say if anyone questioned me. The night before I left, the entire church gathered to pray over me, laying hands on my shoulders and asking God to make me invisible to those who meant harm and visible to those who needed hope. I felt the weight of their prayers like a protective covering as I boarded the early morning bus to Fez, clutching my backpack and trying to look like just another ordinary woman traveling for unremarkable reasons. The journey to Fez took most of the day, and every moment felt like a test of faith. At one point, the bus was stopped at a checkpoint where police officers boarded to check identification papers. My heart hammered in my chest as the officer moved down the aisle, getting closer to my seat. I had no papers to show him, no legitimate explanation for who I was or where I was going. I prayed silently and desperately, asking God to protect me as He had protected so many others before me. When the officer reached my row, he glanced at me briefly. Then suddenly his radio crackled with an urgent message. He turned away to respond and never came back to check my papers before the bus was allowed to continue. I sat there shaking, overwhelmed by the reality that God had just intervened in a tangible way to preserve my mission. The woman sitting next to me asked if I was all right, and I told her I was just tired from traveling. But inside I was marveling at how God's protection was not an abstract theological concept, but a real and present help in moments of desperate need. When I arrived in Fez and found the believers Pastor Youssef had sent me to, their joy at receiving the Bibles and supplies brought tears to my eyes. They were a family who had converted together 3 years earlier and had been surviving on one old Bible that was falling apart from constant reading. The father told me that his children had been praying for months that God would somehow send them more copies so each family member could have their own. When I opened the backpack and pulled out the Bibles, the children began crying and hugging the books like they were made of gold. The mother asked me to stay for dinner and tell them my story, and as I shared about my imprisonment and escape, about the question that had started everything and the journey that had led me to their doorstep, I saw hope lighting up in their eyes. They had felt so alone and isolated in their faith, wondering if they were the only believers in the entire city. My presence proved to them that they were part of something much larger, a network of believers scattered across Morocco who were holding on to Jesus despite the cost. As I left their home that night to return to Marrakesh, I understood with crystal clarity why God had allowed everything I had suffered. He was preparing me not just to survive persecution but to become a lifeline for others walking the same difficult path, carrying hope across dangerous roads to people who desperately needed to know they were not alone.